Welcome back. This is The Firm. Last month, UK's Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, brought into force new listing rules for premium listed controlled companies. Controlled companies are companies where a single shareholder has more than 30%, what we would in India refer to as promoter-led companies. Now, these new listing rules require that the controlling shareholder must sign a relationship agreement with the company that says, amongst other things, that related party transactions will be conducted at arm's length, failing which they will be subject to the approval of a majority of the minority of shareholders. That's similar to what India has just legislated in the Companies Act 2013. The second requirement is that delisting of a controlled company will also require majority of minority approval. This too is similar to SEBI's prevailing delisting regulations in India. But the UK goes one step ahead of India to also require, here onwards, majority of minority approval for the appointment of independent directors. That is, independent shareholders approve the appointment of independent directors. So what prompted the UK to make these changes? And to better understand the implications or the impact of these changes, I have with me Peter King of Weil Gotshal. Peter, thank you very much for joining us on The Firm. I'd like to start with the one step in which the UK has gone ahead of India, and that is the step in which they require independent shareholders to approve the appointment of independent directors. Can you talk us through this change and the impact it will have?
Yes, the FCA is very keen to ensure that independent shareholders in a controlled company, in a company which has a controlling shareholder, are represented by directors who they feel are directors who really do represent them. They don't want those independent directors just to be people who the controlling shareholder has approved and appointed himself. So they have brought in this rule to ensure that those independent directors are voted on by the independent shareholders and not by the controlling shareholder. And it's important to understand one or two cultural differences which make a difference here. First of all, in this country it's usual for shareholders in companies of any decent size to vote on the entire board every year. So every annual general meeting there will be votes on the reappointment of all the directors, including the independent directors. Secondly, our corporate governance code requires the board to contain a strong independent element, and normally that's interpreted as meaning that the chairman must be an independent chairman when he's appointed, and there must be a majority of independent directors on the board. So that means that the independent directors have very considerable power, and by making sure that those independent directors are elected only by the public shareholders, only by the independent shareholders, the FCA has sought to strengthen the position of the independent shareholders.
Peter, this majority of minority vote requirement in the case of related party transactions in the Companies Act here in India has set off quite the debate about how it compromises the ability of the majority shareholder to exercise his legitimate majority. I don't want to get into much detail on that, but I do want to point out that maybe you won't have that same debate in the UK because there seems to be a rather convenient out to this independent director requirement, and that is that if this approval from independent shareholders is not obtained, the company may propose a further resolution within 120 days on which all shareholders will be entitled to vote, and hence the independent shareholders approving the independent directors requirement may in fact get diluted.
Yes, I mean, what the FCA was anxious to avoid was a standoff, a fight, if you like, between the independent shareholders and the controlling shareholder. They didn't want to get into a position where the company effectively has no functioning board because the board keeps proposing candidates for the independent director role and the independent shareholders keep on rejecting them. They wanted to make sure there was, if you like, a tiebreaker. Now, my own view, and I think this is shared by quite a lot of lawyers in London, is that no one will ever want to use this tiebreaker except in very extreme circumstances, because clearly it's a PR disaster if the independent shareholders and the controlling shareholder are disagreeing over the choice of independent directors. And just to deal with one other point you made, I think it's important to realise that the controlling shareholder still has very considerable power. The shareholders can only vote on the candidates that are actually put forward by the board. Because the controlling shareholder will almost certainly be represented on the board, it means that only the candidates that the controlling shareholder is happy with will be put forward to shareholders for approval. So in practice, the controlling shareholder still has quite a bit of power over who is appointed as an independent director.
I thought what was interesting in the second point that seems to be on these new listing rules is the return of relationship agreements. Now the UK has experimented with relationship agreements before. They fell off, I think, a few years ago. They're now back, and within them there is that requirement that all related party transactions have to be at arm's length. If they're not, then again you require a majority of the minority to approve them.
That's right. And in practice, although the rule requiring relationship agreements was abolished for a while, it's now been brought back, a lot of companies with controlling shareholders still had relationship agreements because institutional and other investors here in the UK expected to see them in place. And the relationship agreement would contain, as you say, a number of broad principles, including a principle that the controlling shareholder will not use its power as shareholder to prevent the company from carrying on an independent business, and will ensure that all transactions between it and its associates and the company are done on an arm's length basis.
I'm curious, Peter, I mean, besides this related party transaction bit, which I understand very clearly, what has prompted the return of relationship agreements? Given that they were abolished a few years ago, as you pointed out as well, why did the authorities think that it was necessary to bring back this relationship agreement bit? The reason I'm asking is because I'd also like to point out that when SEBI put out a thought paper on new corporate governance norms here in India, it did in fact include the idea of this relationship agreement as something that controlled companies should follow. Of course, it hasn't become regulation or guidance as yet in India, but I'd like to know more about why UK is reintroducing this.
Okay, so it's worth saying a little bit about why we have companies in the UK that are controlled by a single shareholder. We have actually very few companies that have a group of promoters, perhaps a family or something like that, along the lines that you have in India. Most of our controlling shareholders fall into two categories. And the first category is the private equity houses who have floated companies within their portfolio but maintained a shareholding of, shall we say, 40 to 50%. And those private equity houses have absolutely no interest in exercising undue rights of control. They wish to preserve the value of their investments, so they wish to behave in a way that the outside investors are very happy with, particularly because they may wish to sell further shares in the future. So that's one category. The second category, however, is the one that's caused the problem for the FCA, and that category largely relates to companies which are controlled by states in the former Soviet bloc and in other parts of the emerging markets world. And in those cases, most of these companies are natural resources companies. The state or a state-owned entity has retained considerable control over the company even after it has been floated on the London Stock Exchange, and there are circumstances which are well documented where some of those companies have been subject to what is considered to be undue rights of control by the controlling shareholder. And the London Stock Exchange has considered, and the FCA has considered, whether those companies are suitable for listing at all. And rather than simply saying we don't want the business from those companies, we'd rather they went to their own stock exchanges in Kazakhstan or in Nigeria or wherever it may be, they've said we'd rather have that business, but we want to be sure that investors are properly protected. And that's why they felt it necessary to introduce these additional requirements.
All right, I want to come to the final point then, and that is to do with delisting of a controlled company, which now also requires a majority of minority approval. Again, something that has prevailed in India for several years now under SEBI's delisting regulations. This is being introduced in the UK fresh off the back of an interesting case which involved an Indian group, which is Essar, which ran into opposition from some of its shareholders in the process of taking itself private. Again, that's Essar Energy that I'm referring to.
Yes, again, there are some cultural differences which are important. Normally in the UK, when a company is looking at delisting, the majority shareholder would expect to make an offer to acquire all the shares held by the minority. and would expect to get to a point where, under our squeeze-out rules, that the majority shareholder can in fact acquire all the shares, 100% of the shares in the company. That's what the majority shareholder in SR Energy has sought to do, and the other notorious case from a couple of years ago where this happened is the ENRC case. The previous threshold was 75%. And of course a lot of majority shareholders are sitting very close to that 75% level and could achieve a delisting very easily. And the FCA was concerned that by doing that, minority shareholders might be deprived of the value in their shares unfairly. The delisting rule is designed to prevent that, or at least to make it more difficult, which it does.
You mentioned in your alert to clients that all of these combined changes in the listing rules will have at best a limited effect on the way shareholders conduct their relationship with the listed company.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of our companies don't have a controlling shareholder. In fact, companies with controlling shareholders are quite rare. One question which we do still have is whether these rules will act as a deterrent to companies listing in London, perhaps companies from emerging markets where the culture is a bit different, where perhaps a family or a controlling shareholder wants to retain a big interest and wants to retain more control than London will allow him or them to do.
Well, I'm sure you won't have any trouble with companies from India, Peter, because they're all getting used to many of these provisions that either already exist in SEBI regulations or are being introduced through the new company law. So in that sense, you might say that India's corporate governance requirements are a little bit ahead of the curve than the UK's, and normally it's the other way around. We draw inspiration from your regulations.
You're absolutely right, and if an Indian company is complying with the new requirements in your Companies Act and the various new norms that SEBI is introducing at the moment, that company will be in a very good position to get a listing in London, because a lot of the requirements will already be dealt with. So maybe we'll see more Indian companies thinking about a secondary or perhaps even a primary listing on the London market.
All right, Peter, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for speaking with us. Peter King there of Weil Gotshal on the new listing requirements in UK for premium listed controlled companies. With that, we're going to wrap up this edition of The Firm. Before I go, two quick reminders. One, that you can stay in touch with us on email, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And the second one, that I hope you're watching our special continuing series, Companies Act. This weekend, we're discussing accounting. With that, I'll say goodbye. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week.